We all bloom at some time, some sooner than others. Today's guest bloomed at a young age. My name is Emir, and this is Victoire. Before we begin, I ask that you kindly subscribe to our channel, like, and share these videos. It helps us spread these inspirational pieces much, much further. Back to today's guest. He has performed across many professional wrestling platforms, including, but not limited to, TNA, WWE, MLW, and All Japan. He truly is a high-flying sensation. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome today's guest, T.J. Perkins. Victoire. Victoire gives a special thanks to the EWF and Mr. Jesse Hernandez, as well as SoCal Wrestling TV. Find the app for free on Roku. Staying healthy can be a challenge, but not with Clark's Nutrition and Natural Foods Market. Find the highest quality organic produce and supplements available in the USA. A tattoo is for life, so ensure that your tattoo artist is the very best in the country. Trusted tattoo company and mobile body art bus. Football, baseball, golf, whatever your sport of choice, whenever you visit Palm Springs in the Coachella Valley, visit Legends and Icons, your #1 choice for sports bars. Palm Springs, California, Indian Wells, California, Rancho Mirage, California. They're all considered a destination hotspot, a second home haven. With an exquisite record of negotiating the finest deals for clients, Lowell Folsom III and Associates always deliver. Contact Lowell today at 760-391-2504. Now, on with the show. Okay, welcome back everybody to another episode of Victoire. I am your host Emir, and today I am joined by TJ Perkins. Of course, many of you will remember him from WWE, but he has traveled all around the world. He competes in All Japan and in various other promotions. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome him. TJ, welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Absolutely, brother. You've got an inspirational career, but it all began many moons ago, even though you're still a young man. It started off. So tell us a little bit about your story. Let's go back in time. Maybe tell us a little bit about your childhood and how you discovered pro wrestling first.
It's hard to maybe say. I didn't really have like an aha sort of moment.
Mhm.
I don't. I often don't really put it in the way that I discovered wrestling. It sort of chose me, I guess. I don't have a core memory of when it began. It just, as long as I can remember, it was part of my life. And to be honest, in terms of even, that's just in terms of interest, but in terms of a career, it's also been part of my life for so long. I don't really remember what it's like to live life without it now at this point. I've been doing this since I was 13 years old.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. So it really caught you at a young age. How old are you now, TJ?
39.
Yeah. So pretty much your entire adult life.
Yeah.
So
Almost my entire life,
yeah,
to be
yeah,
honest.
pretty much. Yeah, 13. And what about your parents? Were they very supportive of your endeavor, your journey?
Oh, they didn't really care.
Yeah. Just let you have at it.
Yeah, my parents didn't really keep tabs on me, when I was younger. I don't know like what the base who will be watching this is, but I grew up at a very different time in the world. I'm 39. I know I don't necessarily look it, but I grew up an '80s baby, and we didn't. If you got sick, you didn't check it out. If you got hurt, you just walked it off. And when I left the house, nobody was tracking me. I didn't have a cell phone in my pocket or anything. My parents didn't ask where I was going.
Yeah.
I didn't have curfews. My parents traveled for a living, so they'd be gone for weeks at a time anyway. And we'd have maybe a grandmother or somebody watching me and my sister. I only got one sibling; she's 3 years younger than me. So, I was self-sufficient at a young age and used to, my parents already living out of suitcases. So I learned how to cook foods and do laundry when I was 10 years old. My parents used to leave me at home alone when I was 3 just to go down the street to the store. I mean, that's just the way the world was at the
Yeah.
time. So,
Yeah.
so I guess for me to say that like my parents didn't really care or mind it just that's like I guess a face value statement. They
Yeah.
just didn't, but that's just how it was at the time. It would be very different today.
Yeah, very different. Of course, I'm an 80s kid as well, so I can concur with you. It was a much different time. But now, obviously, you mentioned the difference of the time. You've got social media now and things like that. You can, people are more easily accessible. You can find things more easily. So, how was it for you paving that path during that time? How did you find a wrestling school? How did you navigate those waters? And what were you doing to support yourself when you started to train?
Well, it was a weird way to try and it's hard to describe now, because you could the information is so accessible now, So at the time, I mean, I was writing physical letters with stamps, mailing them out, and you if you wanted to look something up, and we had the internet, and it was very new at the time, So I started doing this in like it was 1998,
Okay.
So that Google didn't exist, YouTube, social media, Facebook, things like that didn't exist, maps didn't exist. I don't even, I'm not sure MapQuest had been invented yet. Maybe it was like a year away. So the only information I had was based on like watching a documentary on TV, which that's another thing. Like it wasn't like you couldn't just go on like Amazon and say, "Oh, here's a documentary, I want to watch it." Like I just had to happen to catch it on
Yeah.
television. If I didn't see it, then
Yeah.
you're out of luck. Like
Yeah.
so you kind of try to. I think we had better memories back then for certain things because you'd kind of be forced to like remember like, oh, I got to remember this for later because you couldn't just tune it out, So you remember where you saw like maybe some wrestling gyms or schools, or you hear about how other guys got started, in watching a documentary or something like that, or listening to interviews or things like that, and then you might see a clipping in like a wrestling magazine or something like that. So then that's how you start to kind of put two and two together a little bit, And then, even though the internet was very bare bones, there was maybe three, four, five places that had like, the first websites ever.
Yeah.
And like, you could find an address or a phone number and send out mail or call for information. That's really what it was. We didn't even have DVDs for this sort of thing yet. That those were brand new at the time. Like we were still watching on VHS if it was recorded. Otherwise, you're just watching live TV and hoping for the best.
Yeah, there was no DVR back then either.
Yeah, yeah,
VHS, you tape it off the TV. Um,
yeah.
so you were about 13 when you started mailing those out, or around about that age?
Yeah, yeah, maybe about 12, 13 or so. I want to say 13 because I got started right before I turned 14, maybe ish. So I probably spent most of that year, 12 and 13, like trying to just contact places. I didn't know. And like I said, it was like a primitive way to figure out information at the time. So like part of my understanding was, wow, a lot of these guys were amateur wrestlers and football players. So in my mind, I thought, well, I'm going to start high school soon. I have to get into the football program and the wrestling program, and it'll work itself out. Like in my head, it was like that's eventually it will present itself because that's kind of how all trades and industry was at the time.
Yeah.
You could be a pipe fitter today and you would look up like, okay, here's how I go to trade school. And then here's the apprenticeship I need to sign up for. And then
Yeah.
I could see here, there's like, testimonials and stuff like you're going to meet this person, you're going to meet that person. This is a segue into this like company. And like, you know where you'll go.
Yeah.
That time you didn't know any of that in any industry, not even just wrestling. I mean, you could be a doctor, you wouldn't know where you're going to do your residency or anything. You find that out
Yeah.
like as you're just drifting through medical school. Now you could kind of look it up and get ahead of it and be like, oh, okay, this person did it this way
Yeah.
and it's documented. Oh, this networking web is going to put me here. So it's like, if you want to work in Boston, you'll do that, you know. So, you know, I just kind of went off of what you would see, you know, guys in like wrestlers' books or something like that. I'd read a lot of autobiographies, and it's like, okay, Ric Flair was a power lifter, and like a lot of the Vern Gagne students were, you know, amateur wrestlers, football players, stuff like that. So I thought, okay, I have to get into these programs, and then whatever found them will find me.
Yeah.
You know, at the very least. And if it doesn't, then that was my only hope anyway. That's what I thought. So
Now, how did you fare in terms of sports, your athleticism through high school?
I was okay. I was an all sport athlete all my life. The only downside was that I was undersized. I was always really good at sports. And you know, my dad was an athlete growing up, and when I was about to start high school, you know, he would bring me to like these NCAA bound athlete meetings the parents would take their kids to. But we were sitting in this meeting room with like these guys have you know, their kids were like 6'2" already, and it's like, you know, I like, it wasn't realistic that I was going to go to university for a sport, maybe baseball or something like that, you know, if I would have stuck to it.
Yeah.
Maybe football if I put on some weight, but like, you know, basketball, that's out. Track and field, you know, that's, well, we're going to go to the Olympics. Like, there's really not a career path there, you know, which sadly a lot of Olympians sort of find that out the hard way once they get out, you know. Although WWE is hiring a lot of Olympic athletes now, so that's a good thing.
Yeah.
Ironically, maybe I would have been ahead of the time by about 2 decades. But yeah, I was a good athlete. And when I got to high school, you know, I tried to stick with all the sports that I had otherwise played. The irony is that I had to start weeding them out because I started wrestling. So I thought I had to keep doing them in order to wrestle, but it turns out it's like I quit football when I got to high school because I had to choose between several different sports and wrestling, because that became my first and to this day my only job. So
yeah. But in terms of academically as well, because you're very well spoken, you're very collected in your thoughts. So academically, how were you?
I was lazy.
Okay.
You know, everybody's always, I don't know, because you know, it's hard to sort of, I don't want to say self-diagnose because diagnose is the wrong word, but like it's hard to sort of self-analyze this sort of thing. You know, it's like self-analyzing insanity. Anybody is crazy. If you're crazy, you're the last one to know it. You know, like you can't. I don't know, you know, how to say if I'm smart or not, but like I was always told by others like I'm a very bright kid and I was very smart, but I was very lazy in school. And you know, as motivationally, especially about high school, I was probably a better student. You know, elementary school and junior high. Because life was still unraveling. And I probably should have seen this coming, because once we start, you know, you get to an age where you start doing career day stuff around middle school, you know, because they're trying to prep you to be a young adult by then. And it was always that I was going to do this. And so, you know, predictably, and probably still is that way to this day. I don't know, like schools may or may not be this way anymore, just with the way that things are so socially, politically charged. Maybe they encourage this sort of thing now. But when I was in school, it's like you had to pick a realistic goal. So, you know, and so I would just do projects based on this anyway, and take the poor grade, because it's like I just knew at a young age, why am I going to waste my time doing a report on being, I don't know, a police officer or something? Nothing against that. It would have been really great to be a sergeant or a detective, but that's not my industry. I didn't have any passion for that, you know, or a carpenter, whatever, you know, electrician. I knew I was not, there was zero chance I was going to do that in my life. So, so I just didn't bother to do those projects, you know. And when I got to high school, I started doing this as a profession, kind of against all odds, ironically, or rather coincidentally. So, so school, I was very much checked out, because I would ditch half the week to do this work. I would have to hit the road. You know, I'd leave school on like a Friday morning. I'd leave during my first or second period, jump in a car, and you know, I'm in Southern California at the time, so you drive up to San Francisco or to Anaheim or to Phoenix or Las Vegas, wherever you're going regionally is where we were headed, so it'd be one of those places. So I'd just miss school on a Friday, and then I would work all weekend and just car hop to people who are going to shows on Friday, Saturday, Sunday nights in different cities. You might go to San Francisco on Friday. I'd miss school that day, and in the locker room, I'd say, okay, well, who's going to the show in Tijuana tomorrow? And I'd jump in their car and we would drive to Tijuana, and then I'd be there and I'd say, okay, who's going back across the border? And
Yeah.
I have a show in Anaheim or San Diego or something. Oh, I'm doing that. So I'd jump in their car and I'd go there. And then Sunday night at that show, I'd say, okay, well, is anybody passing through Riverside? Like, I just go home. And then they would, take me back that night after the show, or if we stayed at, the wrestlers crash at a hotel or whatever, or just stay up all night or whatever. If they were passing by the next morning, I would just go back to school on Monday and maybe miss half the day on Monday, and I resume where I picked up. So, like maybe I was a bright kid, but I just was lazy and also just simply not present. I barely graduated. I probably shouldn't have. I think that they kind of juiced my GPA just because like they're like, "Ooh, he's not a delinquent, so why do we need to like ruin his life and make him stay in like, redo, like he's like, they would look at me and it's like, well, he's not like truant or like not doing his stuff because he's dumb or he's committing crimes. Like he's doing it because of this very beneath 1% reason that most people don't miss school for this sort of thing.
Right.
So they sort of, I think, kind of juiced me just to get me across the finish line. I probably graduated with like the D minus minus average. Like my last year, I had to take 2 English classes. I took freshman and senior English my last year because I would fail a lot based on not being present. There were times when I would finish a test or an essay or a school, and the teachers would leave messages on my parents' answering machine. That was another thing. We had answering machines back then.
Yeah.
And I remember distinctly a few times teachers would leave messages like, your kid was brilliant in this thing, but I've never seen him do this. And it's like, why doesn't he do it? And it's just like,
well,
my parents didn't even hear it because they weren't even listening to the voice messages.
but I will say, I mean, you've definitely said something that's a first, and I've interviewed a lot of the guys. You were that young and you were already getting bookings and you were already traveling to Mexico. I mean, that's a remarkable accomplishment. That is very mature and very ahead of your age at 15, 16. That's remarkable, TJ.
Well, I mean, it's relative, I think, like if it were the 1930s, some 5-year-olds would be like, what? You weren't in the workhouse yet?
Oh, yeah.
But I mean, it is relative though. At the time, you kind of had to grow up a little quicker in a way. And in a way, the way that I did it was even quicker than other people at the time. But then it sacrificed a lot of my social upbringing. Like to this day, I'm still a very socially awkward person. I don't handle I don't not that I don't handle crowds very well. I'm comfortable public speaking or being in front of audiences or anything like that. Like that's never made me nervous or give me anxiety. But I don't handle like a crowd of 8 people socializing. I don't handle that very well.
Yeah.
Because I didn't grow up doing that. I was, I grew up in the sticks in Riverside in the orange groves. I didn't have more than 1 or 2 neighbor kids around me at any one time. And then, when I got to high school, I wasn't doing stuff that kids do.
Mhm.
I was trying to make a living and doing this stuff. So, to this day, I don't go out. Like when guys go out after matches, like maybe they go to the bar, have a drink or go out to eat or something like that. It's so rare that I do because I just don't, I would rather go back to my room and now this part of my life is normalized a little bit. So now I look forward to getting back, talking to my kids, talking to my wife, things like that. But, before that, I was like, my social growth stunted so much because of that. But, I do think I was a bright kid growing up. I just didn't do my work. Is all. When I was really young, actually, this is related but unrelated. My mom had me acting because she, being a Filipino mom, wanted me to perform or be a doctor. Ironically, coincidentally, my sister's a doctor and I'm a performer, so it checks out for her. But Um, one of the things when we were going to readings to find an agent, the two different agents that had picked me up, in my brief time as a child actor, were so surprised at how well spoken I was as like a 7 or 8 year old. Like this, he reads and speaks like he's in college. I don't know. I've always been able to, maybe it's because I can mimic things very easily. Maybe that's why, like, I do so well at this industry, but like, I think I could mimic intelligent adults in the way that they speak, and I could understand them
Yeah.
because I could mimic them. It made me understand them easier. So maybe I have a innate ability to understand my surroundings, and maybe that's what this is.
Well, you definitely have an artistic side to yourself. I mean, that's obviously evident in what your performance is. But I think as an artist, if I may, because I hear a lot of a lot of me and you. I was very much like you as a child. And I think what it is we get carried away in our thoughts, and we're always planning, and we're always strategizing in our minds, and we are an observer to the others. I particularly wasn't one that would go out to the bars and stuff like that. I didn't enjoy that. I would be in joy and driven by the work I'm going to produce or what I'm going to focus on. And I think you fall into that bracket too. And that probably helped you to learn faster and be able to mimic, like you said, because whereas everybody else was distracted, you were focused, right?
Perhaps I might just be finding out at 39 that I just have autism or something.
Well, that's what
Super
they.
locked all the time. But observing my oldest son, because my youngest son is still an infant, but my oldest son, he's a toddler. He's 2 going on 3, and the way that he acts, I distinctly have core memories of acting like him. And he remembers and retains things from like his shows and songs so well, and like kind of acts them out and performs them and does like it's weird. You look at him and it's like, man, this is a very odd child, And when I'm around other kids, like my friends' kids, are not as engaged that way, I guess, like as far as like freedom of art or whatever is entertaining them in their heads. But like it might just be something that runs in me internally, and like I kind of could see it through my son, and I'm like, wow, if I was anything like this, it doesn't surprise me why I ended up in this industry, because
Yeah.
he's very much that way.
Yeah. So let's go back a little bit then. Let's talk about your training then. So where did you first start to train? Who were some of your greatest mentors at that time?
Well, I started at Jess's gym, um, Jesse's gym in San Bernardino. At the time, it was ran by him and Bill Anderson together. They had been business partners and wrestling partners, industry partners for a while. And, I was a very shy, small, young, and undersized kid. I don't even think Jesse remembers me from the early days, because I probably, I just would kind of go on Saturday mornings or whatever. And I know Bill certainly didn't, because eventually, maybe a year later or so, they split, and they had separate gyms. And when I went to Bill's, it was like meeting them all over again. And so I would train at his gym and I'd train at Jesse's gym. And I think even Jesse, it's like he probably thinks he met me then, because I was a little older at that point, maybe like 14, 15, and like a little bit more out of my shell. But those were my earliest experiences, is that. And, I would train, and it was only like a few weeks into training, I was tagging along with some of the older wrestlers. And by older, they were really younger wrestlers in regards to the system. They were just older than me. But I would tag along with them to shows because they were trying to get their first matches. So they would, try to get the extra match slots on the cards locally. And I would tag along with them. They're hoping to get on the card. I'm hoping to follow them and then get on the card, So it's like a, a layered effect. And yeah, I got on a couple matches that way early on when I was, 13, 14 years old. So that's how I kind of got started.
Yeah. Did they help you get bookings, or was it something you actively pursued yourself?
They, as in Bill and Jess.
Yeah, Bill and Jesse, yeah.
Not really. They were, the thing is, like, the way that then Jesse still is this way, because he has, his own card that he promotes in association with his gym. So he provides a lot of opportunity out of the box and in house for as guys. And I believe that that system is great because a lot of places it's almost like going to like college or trade school in the real world where you get trained and once you're out of camp they're like good luck and they
Yeah.
send you out amongst the wolves, you know. And so it's great. Bill and Jess both had local cards attached to their gyms, so they were able to kind of provide your almost like your first internship. You know,
Yeah.
like you jump right into learning how to produce a show and like hold a camera and set up a ring and ring the bell, run the audio, stuff like that. Maybe you work on graphic design, just different things. And of course you get on the undercard whenever there's a space.
Yeah.
But no, that they weren't, you know, I think it would have at least taken debuting for them before they would start to kind of push you into the outside world because they wouldn't want to do that prematurely, you know. So I really just did it by tagging along with the other guys, you know.
Mhm.
And that was really how that came about was me just DIYing my career.
But you were a very hard worker. So at the time, did you take another job or were you able to earn enough money from wrestling fairly early on to support yourself? How did you do that?
Well, the good thing, I guess, about starting that young is that, I'm still a kid. So, it's not like I had a mortgage or a phone bill, you know. Again, we didn't have cell phones at the time. So, like, you think about what a 13-year-old kid might have to be responsible for today. Like, nothing, right? Like, they're too young to have a car. So, there's no car payment, there's no insurance. They're too young to have their own health insurance. So, there's no that. They can't live on their own. So, they don't have to pay a mortgage. They hopefully don't have any kids.
Yeah.
And they might have a cell phone that their parents hold them accountable for if they're good parents. But at the time we didn't have that. So, whatever I made, which was very little, I was able to kind of keep, which was great because at the time, again, the world was different. So now it'd be a little bit, this may be something that is gone forever, but it was a unique situation where working from the age of 13 to say 16 or 17 when you might possibly have your first car
Mhm.
for those first few years, if you were working as a 13, 14, 15-year-old, maybe you had like delivering a pizza or like a paper route, right? At that time in the world in the 80s, 90s, like it was great because you had this income. It was very small, but you had it and you didn't immediately have to put it into anything.
Right.
So it's like you sort of learned how to manage money a little bit, I think, at an early age because you didn't have things that were, you didn't have responsibilities that were forced on you because it just simply didn't exist at the time.
Right. Right.
Whereas now, either you might be forced to have too many responsibilities, like you might be like 13, 14, and your parents are like, you have to pay for this phone, you have to pay for this thing, you have to pay for your Ubers or whatever the case is. Or more often than not now, parents are like, you don't have to pay for anything. So in either case, you kind of don't get to learn. Either it's too much or it's too little and you don't learn. But at that time, it was just the right amount. Like I made very little, but I had to spend very little. So I learned like, okay, this is going to have to last me for X amount of time. And it served me later in life because, 10 years later, I was homeless. And then it was like almost like being 13 again. And it was like, wow, I'm making very little on these shows that are for, people just starting out. But now I'm an adult. And it's like, I remember what it was like being a teenager. And the only thing I had to worry about was starving. So I was like, okay, I made 20 bucks a night I could eat. Then when I was 23 and homeless, I was like, well, I'm homeless, so I need to worry about not starving. And it's like, here I am with 20 bucks in my pocket again.
Yeah.
Let's begin again. So
So let's talk about that because I wasn't aware of that. And obviously that must have been a very tough situation for you to go through, but obviously it instilled some sort of character in you. So how did that come about? And then what sort of questions raised in your mind at that time? I mean, were you going to change path or just continue going?
I guess there's a lot to unpack with that a little bit. I I grew up Catholic. I grew up a very religious person. I still am to a certain degree. And So I believe that there's a purpose for everything that happens. And that being said, the beginning, a lot of stuff, I started very early and I did work very hard, but this is not necessarily a merit-based system at times. Nothing really is in life. It is and it isn't. So a lot of great things happened to me that I was very fortunate to have, opportunities and things like that. I was in a WWF developmental when I was 15 years old, just because I happened to be in LA when there was one in LA, and I was good enough to be considered able to be there. Um, so I was very lucky to perform in that and get that education so young in a WWE system. And Japan scouted me when I was 17. I went to New Japan Pro Wrestling, and I'm still there to this day because I can always go back. It's like, the team that drafted me, so to speak. Um, and So a lot of great things happened very young. I went to TNA wrestling at 19 and Ring of Honor, and I was doing WWE dark matches, and tryouts and things like that at 20, 21 years old. You fast forward 10 years later, and I'm 23, and I'm a young man now and old enough to kind of actually understand that this is a career and not just something that I'm feeling out anymore. And I formulated real goals for the first time. And I thought, okay, I'm going to go all in on trying to get a job with WWE. So I moved across the country and do, what you're told to do. You're told to do everything, not 99% of it. So I said, okay, if you say jump and I say how high, if you tell me to go and I say go where, I'm going to do everything as asked of me. But, nobody thinks that they're going to fail. And then when they do, when they do fail, they forget the ambition completely, and most often they pivot to something else in their life and just pretend that that chapter never existed because they don't want to face failure. Like so many people that they wanted to, I mean, just say do this or be an actor, and then they hit that sort of thing, that sort of wall, they fail, and then it's like, your friends catch up to you and you're an electrician like 10 years later, and they pretend like that chapter never existed because they don't want to face it. So, I hit that same wall like everybody else. I just didn't look at it as like, I'm ashamed. It's just like I knew I could fail. So why would I be surprised that the worst possible outcome happened to be the one? You can roll snake eyes. That's the reality of rolling dice. You can roll snake eyes. That's what it is. And that's what it was. I struck out, and all the great jobs that I was gifted before that fell in my lap that I was fortunate to have now had been filled by other people. So I couldn't just return to them. And it was like starting all over again. And um, Now the qualifier before saying, I'm a religious person, I believe everything happens for a reason. I wanted to understand why that happened for me. And so it was a constant conversation with God every day. For me, it was a lot of conversation, a lot of argument, I think, on my end, like trying to understand why, and then trying to understand what the present means. Like why, if I was meant to learn something, why am I going through this? If I was meant to choose a new path, why are you, because it also happened at a weird time in the world. This was like 2009, 8, 9. Oh. And so during that time, like 2008 to 2010-ish, the world was in a recession very heavily. And even just for a young adult anywhere, you couldn't get a job. People with full educations were being denied jobs. You couldn't do anything in the world. So I just remember thinking, if you didn't want me to do this, I understand you taking this from me. But now you're putting me in a situation where I will starve tonight if I do not wrestle tonight at this bar down the street in front of 8 people. A few years prior, I was in the Tokyo Dome. Now I'm in front of 8 people in a bar. But if I don't do this and make $15, I will starve tonight because you took this from me at a time in the world where I can't just go work at Baskin Robbins.
Right.
So for a while, I kind of was angry. Like it was a very like faith testing situation because I would be angry with God. Like, why do you want? I don't want to do this anymore. If you want me to do something else, allow me to do something else. I don't want this anymore. Why now when I'm motivated to move on from it, are you putting me in a position where that's the only thing that's going to literally make me survive?
Mhm.
Because you're not allowing me. I was trying to pump gas at gas stations. Like I tried to get any job, cleaning pools, selling art door to door, like to businesses, the exact thing that no solicitation signs are put up for. I was trying to do any other thing in the world
Yeah.
than wrestle because I truly felt like if I'm to understand this fully and try to be humble as a human, God is telling me this is not for me.
Hmm.
But now you're making me do this.
Yeah.
So it was like, why? And I think in the end, I just didn't appreciate the first 10 years. I didn't appreciate the things that I've been given. We're sitting here doing this interview because of Jesse. And if you ask Jesse, he'll very much tell you I was a different young man than I was today. I was a very aggressive, very temperamental, at times very angry young man, and very bullheaded person. And I think that I didn't understand that this was a career. I didn't understand that this was meant to eventually support a family and the goals that I wanted. Um, so there was maybe a lack of understanding and appreciation on my part. And it's weird because it felt like once I understood that, not only did I stop kind of being angry at God for it, but I started getting all these things back.
Yeah.
And then it was like it just started falling out of the sky.
Yeah.
Like I remember like getting a call like they wanted to use me back down to Mexico. I went down. It was a great experience. And then call came from Japan. Can you come out for one match? I came out and wrestled in Japan for one match and met a lot of my heroes and stuff. And then it was like TNA calls, hey, we need you to take this job. And I say, great, when do I start? First day, because this was what makes me feel so cosmically linked to this whole thing, this process, I guess, is I was homeless in Florida trying to work for WWE in Florida. And I couldn't get back home to the West Coast. Eventually, I got back home to the West Coast, and all these things I just said started happening for me again. Then TNA offered me a job. I said, "Great, when do I start?" They said, "You're going to start on this date." Where first event is in Tampa, Florida. It's where I was homeless. Literally, I went back to work in the arena that I used to beg for quarters outside of, or not beg, but look on the sidewalk for quarters. Um, and then like when I started working for WWE, it they they brought me in for this tournament in Florida, and it's just so weird. It's like I felt like God was saying that was His way of saying hello. Like there's a reason why I put you through this, and I need to leave. He needed to leave me a trail of breadcrumbs just so that I'm reminded that there was a reason for all that. So that was my experience being homeless.
Yeah. But that's incredible because obviously, as you can tell, I am a man of faith. I love the Lord. I'm a Christian. God's worked in my life many ways. You talked about the recession. I had something happen to me during that time where I had pursued a dream, left England without any parachute, and I was moving along very quickly. God opened some doors for me, and then all of a sudden it was gone. And it was the recession and things were difficult. And but yeah, you learn. When I look back and I think what could have become of me had God not humbled me and had I not been listening, it could have ended up far worse. So with you, like I said, it beams off of you that you have wisdom beyond your years. And again, maybe again that experience, God works in His own ways. He humbles us in His time and His way. He showed you, He gave you that foreshadow of what would be, but taught you how to handle it. And obviously, you're in a position now where you're stable. You've got a wife. You've got kids. You can support yourself. So yeah, that's incredible. That's big for me. I love it when you guys share your testimony, especially if you are of faith. So thank you for sharing that. I appreciate it, TJ.
No, I'm happy to because I yeah faith is a funny thing, right? Like the very definition and the root of it suggests that it can't exist if you actually know what the truth is.
Mhm.
That's what faith is. It's close your eyes and you have a belief based opinion,
Yeah.
and it's trust. If you know the answer, you can't have trust
Yeah.
because it's built on the idea that you don't know the answer, but you're willing to accept it anyway based on how you feel about it. So, it's a funny thing. I meet a lot of people that are, it self-described as without faith, or, and maybe they're agnostic, or maybe they're an atheist, or things like that. And it's just, to me, it's so funny because I see it as such a universal concept, faith. I think divvying it up is where it becomes complicated for people, because I mean, the morals that we have in the world, science would suggest that we're born and we're here existing just like the jungle. I mean, animals, right? And there's certain empathy and sympathy with animals, but for the most part, it's a ruthless existence. That is, right? Humans are different. And that capacity to have morals didn't happen through nature. Like, it had to come from somewhere. So it's like, whatever somebody believes or doesn't believe that their God is, that idea, in essence, one way or the other, is what instilled morals in us.
Mhm.
And that's how we govern ourselves. And so, to me, that's always been my spine of what faith, like faith exists for a reason, and there's a good reason to trust it. We all have it, whether we believe it or not, which I think is the funny thing. So,
Yeah.
and that's also made me, the understanding that has made me so universally accepting of everybody, because everybody's operating on faith one way or another.
Yeah.
But for me, that's my greatest story of faith, is that I was put on a track, I was sidetracked, and then retracked, and it seemed very much for a reason.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you what, God bless you. Amen. That was, that was a beautiful, beautiful piece of testimony right there, TJ. So we'll come back to that in a bit, but let's now dive into the career. Let's dive in now to mainstream with the contracts. Now you're out of the independent circuit per se. You performed
Mhm.
for TNA, you performed with WWE. Um, I want to, in terms of emotional, the way your emotions were you able to deal with it fairly easily, or was it like at first, like, oh my gosh, and you're nervous and you're hyped up, or was it an easy transition to finally have achieved that goal? What was going through your mind psychologically?
Um, I didn't really get too emotional about it. I've never been an anxious or a nervous person. That's just, I don't know. That's just wired into my genetics. Maybe I just, at an early age, I could shoot a late free throw with a steady hand. I ever since the beginning, standing in a batter's box with two strikes in the bottom of the ninth, like in Little League, I even at that age, I had a very good understanding of, well, I'm either going to succeed or I'm going to fail, and then I'm going to have to wake up tomorrow and play another game. So there's really no need to be nervous about this. And I'm gonna live the rest of my life. I'm gonna have 1,000 more baseball games. That's really, swinging and missing or swinging and hitting right now really is a very small blip in the grand scheme of things. So I didn't really, I've never been nervous for anything.
Yeah.
Um, and I think, though, part of not being so emotional about it later is that I think it's natural to have a little bit of, I don't want to say aggression, but there's a little bit of, like, almost like apathy or disdain. Um, and you can make it like a healthy management of it, when you go through such things and then you achieve it. You have an understanding of it, right? Like, you can be afraid of fire for
Mhm.
a long time, and then eventually you get burned, and you almost sort of like handle it sarcastically now. You kind of smirk at it because now you know where the line is. Like you know where you're going to get burned, and because of that understanding, you now know how to gather it. You know how to create it. You know how to put it out. You know how to transfer it, throw it, cook something, burn. Burn something else. Like now with that power comes a different sense of like mental management. So because I had been burned by the fire, and now the fire was bending to my will, so to speak. It was almost like, I didn't have like, I was grateful, but I was grateful because of now what I could use the fire for.
Yeah.
I was not grateful necessarily or emotional in the aspect of I've beaten the fire.
Right.
Like it didn't matter to me to get a win
Yeah.
so much as okay, I was off track for so many years. I feel like I can resume my work as a human being now.
Yeah.
Not my work as a wrestler. As a wrestler, you can do creative work anywhere. You go into an empty. I could go to Jesse's gym right now and creatively fulfill myself as a wrestler.
Yeah.
But as a human being, my work was to try to start a family someday. Like create a home and all that. I felt like okay, now I can get back to my work as a human being. And so, I wasn't necessarily emotional, more so just I could handle it more maturely, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. So talk a little bit about some of the highlights then for you in TNA and WWE before we move to more of the present. What were some of the
Yeah.
highlights?
Um, I think it was really in WWE. It was really nice to when I got started. It was only like maybe a month, and we had California on the schedule. So we went to Staples Center like maybe a month to me being there. Um, so that was really cool for a sentimental point of view. I'm changing in the Lakers locker room, and like there's so many people that will have seen me in these like dirt shows in California, and they'll go to these local shows, and then they'll obviously go to like WWE and see Hulk Hogan, and then later Bret Hart and Undertaker and Shawn Michaels, and later Kurt Angle and John Cena and Chris Jericho and all these people come through town. And now when they're going to see that, they're seeing one of the people that they saw in the dirt shows on that show. And so that was pretty cool. Like that was a highlight for me because, I would drive in and out of these arena parking lots and, there'd be hundreds of those like locals that of that caliber that they've seen my car leave the Anaheim marketplace, and they've seen my car leave, these church and convention hall shows that Jesse would do. And now they're seeing it leave the Anaheim Pond or Staples Center. And so they would, stop it, and I'd get out and, talk to them, take pictures of them and things like that. And it was like this very welcoming and warm moments. Those were highlights.
Yeah, yeah. And then in terms of Japan, right? Obviously, you're still performing over there.
Yeah.
Culture wise, because you've been going there since you were a teenager, right? So have you fully embraced that culture? Do you love it when you're out there?
Yeah. I think they make me a more, I think it makes me uh, a more amenable citizen when I'm home. Cause I like, I would not think twice of, if I couldn't find a trash can, I would just litter,
Yeah.
like when I was younger. And, or like if I was walking on the sidewalk, I wouldn't, or going up and down stairs, I wouldn't like be so worried about making space for others. Well, like not like I'd get in their way, but like, there's little things that like the culture over there has grown on me a lot. And so I've become a very I don't know, passive, amenable citizen in that way.
Yeah.
Um, and just I don't know. There's a peaceful way of living out there when it's this sort of industry. Like if I'm in America, when I was in WWE and things, living out of a suitcase, it can be kind of like a dark way to live sometimes. In Japan it's different. I don't know what it is about the culture, but immersing yourself in the towns and the cities and in the hotels and the things out there, like it just feels I don't know what it is about it. It just feels right. But maybe it's because it was essentially a core memory from my young adult life. And it's the first place that really took me in when I kind of ran away from home, you
Yeah.
know. So it's the first place I really was like sent to live there. And so yeah, I've sort of immersed myself in that.
Yeah. Now, in terms of that, you brought up a valid point because obviously now you love your wife, your children. You've expressed how you are. You do prefer that quiet time. Now that you're able to earn a living the way that you do, would there be any designs for you to try and get back into that constant schedule with a WWE and AEW, or are you content now with the life that you've established, working on the human side of yourself and now the professional side?
Well, it's a mixed bag because, certain parts of, your human self can be approached better, for example, maybe by being in that sort of schedule. Like I would love to see my kids every week.
Yeah.
When I'm in Japan, I don't see them for a few weeks. And then I get to see them for a few weeks. If I was in WWE, I'd see them for a few days. And then I wouldn't see them for a few days. But then I would see them for a few days. So it's sort of a mixed bag, It sort of depends on your wavelength, your speed of life at the time, like certain things like that. I'm sure I'm certain my wife would want me to be able to be around a little bit more. But then at the same time when I am able to be here every day, like uninterrupted for a while, then that's something I wouldn't be able to have. So it's a mixed bag in regards to all that. But outside of that, I don't really have creative goals in terms of that, at least professionally. Like I don't. It's weird to say because you grow up as a sports person. It's weird to say you grow up learning the name on the front of your uniform is more important than the name on the back. But reality is now, and I think for the betterment of like my family and the world, the name on the back is way more important than the name on the front. I don't care what team I'm playing for. I just like, to me, all of them serve my ability to take care of my family. So, if it was Japan or AEW, WWE, wherever it is, TNA, like it doesn't really matter to me.
Yeah.
I do have a very high respect for the New Japan office. So, I appreciate it in that way. So I have no desire to change that. But in regards to me as my goals as a person, that they all kind of have a different way of serving the same thing. It just kind of depends.
Yeah. Now, obviously, we know wrestling is very, very time consuming. You've got
Yeah.
attention to detail, your character. You've got to get yourself psyched up for these things. How do you now, and this is where you can bestow wisdom on whoever's watching. Um, you've got a wife, you've got children. How do you, and what practices, and has it become easier for you to switch off the character when you get home so you can dedicate that time to your family? What sort of practices do you put in place, or is it organic now at this point in your career where you can come home and just turn it off? Or is it a struggle? And how do you deal with that? For maybe another wrestler who's like, because I've heard the stories, oh, my husband's always thinking about it. And then the wife gets upset. And, so how do you deal with that, TJ?
Well, I think that staying in the moment mentally and spiritually is really the key. When I was homeless, one of the best pieces of advice, or I guess the best outlook I learned was, well, two things. I was really, because I was always fascinated with Eddie Guerrero's career in life. And his struggle with addiction helped me understand my struggle with being homeless and failing so hard, because he kind of was at the time too. Like he lost his family for a bit. He was living in an apartment by himself, eating rice cakes and starting over in the indies because he lost his job. So there's very similar, like his rock bottom looked a lot like my rock bottom, and his outlook was very clearly, you have to take it one moment at a time. You think about getting through the week, getting through the month, getting through the year. In regard for him, it was sobriety.
Mhm.
But like everybody has, a feeling of failure and a fear of it in regards to like, it's almost like claustrophobia. You feel locked into this moment. It feels overwhelmingly negative and terrible. But his thing was, getting through those amounts of time seems insurmountable. But if he would tell himself, can I just get through this afternoon and not need a drink? I could do that. And then you get through the afternoon, he's like, can I just get through the evening and we'll see how I feel tomorrow morning? Yeah, I could do that. And taking it one moment at a time is what got him through it. And I think the byproduct of that is, and thankfully probably for him, because it's sad, is such a tragic short end to his life, but it probably made that back end of his life feel like a lot more time than otherwise, because it would normally, time flies. But when you take it one moment at a time, you feel like you don't miss a thing. So for me, that was an important part of getting through that period of time. The other piece of advice I read, it was from Phil Jackson, coach of the Lakers, and he would always instill this proverb: before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. And the lesson is to stay in the moment. Like before and after all the change, like the task in front of you is still the task in front of you. Just stay in the moment and take it one step at a time. So that being said, I had always sort of like learned to stay in the moment. And so like because of that, as a performer, I've never been somebody that has to turn something on or off. Mm-hmm. So I am the same guy you're talking to right now. If on the other side of this door was not my basement, if it was a 10,000 seat arena, I would feel as naturally as it is being my basement with a couch and a TV. Like I walk out and I handle my job surgically, like a technician. Like it's just, I know what I need to do and I can stay in the moment and do it. And who I am is who I am. Mm-hmm. There's no right or wrong way to do it as a performer. You know, I guess if it were acting, it'd be like being a method actor, you know, but I feel like so many of the hardships and tragedies in the big sense, in the macro for our career, is people that have to turn something on when they go and turn it off when they come back, because it's hard to turn off and on. Yeah. Because turning it on lends itself to the idea that you have to run on an autopilot of some sort. Mm-hmm. That's tough, because you can never trust having to stop a train once it starts. You know, you never know when that train will stop. You can hit the brakes, but it's not going to stop immediately, right? The other thing on the micro part of it, as a performer, a lot of bad habits for young performers, and this is more of like the technical sense for people who are like literally wrestlers thinking of this, but it might apply to other jobs too. You want to avoid things in your training and your upbringing and whatever industry you are in this case, we're talking about wrestling, that teaches you to go on autopilot. Mm-hmm. Like once you learn how to handle a system seamlessly, like it's second nature, you got to stop handling it like it's second nature in terms of like your training for whatever field you're in. Right. Because the second nature part of it is only taught to you so that you can do things safely and functionally, right? Once you learn how to not fail your task or hurt somebody else or make somebody else's job harder, that autopilot can't be nurtured past that, because then you start wasting time and then you can start making dangerous errors, and because you can't turn something off that's turned on. Mm-hmm. So staying present, staying in the moment, and staying, you know, aware of the phone booth you're in, figuratively speaking, is key for me. So I've never had to manage that where and I've just this last in Japan, our WrestleMania is Wrestle Kingdom. Yeah. So, you know, I just walked out into a 60,000 seat stadium dressed as a scary vampire monster, but I didn't have to turn anything on or off to do it. I approach the job as the job, and I am myself, and I stay in the moment. I'm aware of that. So as best you can, you want to be able to perform in a way where you don't have to turn something on, because A, you're ready at all times. You never have to turn something on. And B, you never have to turn it off. And that is where a lot of people lose the most important things in their life, which is their life. You know, you go home and that's how you lose a family. That's how you lose kids. That's how you lose your sense of self. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And like I think, in terms of the original characters, the golden era guys, that left that indelible mark upon so many of us, they were still themselves, a lot of them. Like you said, outside of the business, they just turned it up a notch in front of the camera, as the cameras usually, make someone do who's a natural performer. But they weren't forcing anything. You would often find that was just an extension of them. That was who they were. Whereas
Yeah,
my wife said something to me this morning. If you have to play something, chances are it's not going to go well eventually. If you're trying to play something you're not, like you said, turning something on, turning it off, turning it on and off. It's, in any profession, like you said. I agree with you. Now, you said something earlier about public speaking, and I have been inspired by all the things you said today. Like I said, you're very eloquent, you're very knowledgeable. Is this something that you engage in currently?
public speaking.
For like
Uh,
seminars and things like that for children, and because I think you'd be very good speaking with kids.
no, I mean, it's been suggested to me at some point, maybe to, I guess, do what would be the equivalent of, like TED Talks, that sort of thing. It's been suggested that I could, be helpful in that way. I think that I am getting to an age where my career is starting to open doors as far as what I can do outside the ropes, a lot of the production side and the mentoring side, I've kind of dove into. In a lot of ways, I've been yanked into it as people started bestowing those responsibilities on me. So it's opened up a whole new world of things that I look forward to doing
Yeah.
within this industry, at some point, in the next 10 years, hopefully my legs will still keep carrying me. Um, but yeah, I mean, I guess over the last few years, I've already sort of been pulled into that because I get hired often. I get hired often to do day clinics and seminars and things, and inevitably those turn mostly into like lectures and Q&As and things, and I've found that ends up being the most fruitful part of those things. So you can learn to do the physical stuff every day or in an instant. That's really the easy part. But the mentorship, I guess, even in such a short time as like a couple hours, is that's something that you won't get every day. It's something that I've excelled at, I guess. But I mean, maybe that's just through experiences.
Hmm. Well, definitely. I think that professional wrestling gives you an ability to experience the world, grow up very, very quickly, and experience different personalities that can inspire and bestow that wisdom upon you. And one of the reasons, TJ, that I started this whole series was to create that kind of a platform. I've often said TED Talks meets Joe Rogan minus the cussing. I want to create that platform so that we can tell the life story, educate, inspire, motivate, and talk about faith to really help, you know, potentially prevent a lot of tragedies from happening by just listening to the guys that have gone and paved the path for you. So I think you've articulated that so well today. It's been a huge blessing to be able to hear that. Now, let's just little few things on the pro wrestling character because you mentioned the vampire, and of course, we've seen it online. It's a very interesting presentation that you have now. So, what was the birth behind that new look and all of that you're doing now?
Well, I guess there's a few things. Like I've always looked at our industry perhaps maybe the same way that like Johnny Depp would look at acting. Um, some actors approach their industry as in once they carve out who they are as an actor, that's who they are all the time. And that works for a lot of people. Like, Ryan Reynolds is Ryan Reynolds in everything he does. He basically plays himself. Leonardo DiCaprio, same thing. He kind of plays himself, although he kind of gets outside of the box a lot.
Yeah.
George Clooney plays himself, no matter what role he's in. Johnny Depp's the complete opposite. It's like he doesn't have a self. It's like he's always something different. But that's what artistically fulfills him. For me, I've kind of looked at wrestling the same way. It's hard to change as constantly because things don't exist in a vacuum as a product. There's ongoing episodic things. So you kind of reinvent based on eras, I guess, if you're around long enough like I am. But so I enjoy kind of being something that's very different than I am. And I get a lot of the same probably analogies that I'm sure he got when he was young too, which is this, I guess maybe a similarity. Like a lot of people see me as a pretty boy or something like that. So it's kind of self-fulfilling to put on an ugly face and go against that grain a little bit. The Office is kind of begrudging about it. They lament the lack of, I guess, female fan interest in it, but I get a kick out of doing something different. So that's one layer of it, is that I like going outside the box. That's what's fulfilling outside of the monetary part of this job, is that you get to kind of explore things that you're interested in.
Yeah.
Which I guess leads me to the next thing, is that is something I'm interested in. I've always been into, gothic and horror themes and mythology and things like that, and which then leads me to the other reason why I did, is because this happens to be based on folklore from my family's culture as a Filipino. The character is basically our version of, it's like our chupacabra. It's like our version of a vampire for Filipinos growing up. That was the scary bedtime story for young Filipinos, that this monster was outside and you better behave or be indoors, or it's going to hunt you. And I think it's also a good allegory for social politics, because it was also used as a social political weapon. The story was used in social political ways in the Philippines too, to scare locals into sort of following like imposing government. I'm not really much for blaming things on governments or anything like that, but I always thought that that's interesting, is that it was meant as a story to scare locals, but then locals eventually used it as a story to scare their oppressors. And so I think that it's a fun time in the world to sort of have that as an artistic expression, because one way or the other it could express whatever you're feeling. And for me, it's something that ties me back to my family, and keeps me, artistically in the aesthetic, I guess, of things that I'm interested. I normally wear black only. I like scary things and ghost stories and things like that, and it also gave me something different to do. I was basically a cartoon character in WWE, so now I get to be something different.
Yeah, it's very different, but it is a tremendous presentation, and it looks like a lot of effort and detail with the eye and because you do wear a contact lens, right? You've got the
Yeah, there's a lot of different things for it. Yeah.
yeah, so it's very, very. I mean, it's it's interesting because it is a vampire, and obviously we've seen the vampires, but your take on it is that original, yeah, it's original flair, and I think especially for me when I first saw it, it was such a difference from when I'd watched you in WWE. I mean, it's so vastly different, but
Yeah.
again, so marketable. And maybe let's touch briefly on that as well, as we educate slightly marketability. So what are your thoughts on, because the industry has changed. Obviously, we don't see the big boss man or the Mountie or characters like this anymore. But how important is it to develop a personal brand to distinguish yourself from others? In your mind, is it as significant today? Should people be considering that, or what are your thoughts?
So to me, I think being self-sufficient in marketability is more necessary today than it would be before. When I left WWE and was kind of jumping back into the independent pool, it had been almost 10 years that I'd been out of that, because before WWE, I was in TNA for however many years. Before that, it was like Ring of Honor for a couple of years. And before that, I was homeless. So I kind of jumped right back into mainstream contracted jobs.
Yeah.
And now it's almost like 10 years later, I'm like, now I'm an indie wrestler again. Um, and the world has changed so much from that to like the 10 years prior. And when I started, it, like we said, informationally, things just did not exist at the time. So you were really at the mercy of being a grassroots movement until a bigger entity in the industry decided that you would be a good cog in their wheel, at which point you are at the mercy of whatever they feel works for their machine, which is where a lot of people go wrong. This is sidetracks. Like, people should understand what they are when they get to those things. Like the world isn't meant to serve your dreams. Like, you just have to hope that your dreams serve the cog that you're meant to be. That's a very humbling and important lesson for young performers.
Yeah.
But now, there is a self-sustaining market, and a lot of what these industries pilfer from the free market is people that are succeeding in that. And I had to like kind of learn that when I came out. And so the way that I kind of put it to people now is like, if I do a seminar or clinic, and there's usually a lot of crossover with people that do cosplay and they're into comics and things like that, because we're all a bunch of nerds. And so inevitably there's usually somebody in the group that I'm lecturing or teaching that will be in that industry. And I'll say, okay, did you do Comic-Con when it was here on whatever date? And they say yes. And I asked them, like, how much was your booth fee? And I said, oh, I paid this much for the booth. How many days? All 3 days. Okay. So you paid this much for the booth fee. And what'd you do with your booth? And the answer is always the same. Like, oh, this is the brand I've created, or this is the focus of what I do. And I have this merch and stuff that I sell. And I say, okay, so you've created something. You're hoping that you're paying this booth fee to get into this event, essentially, in front of this people traffic, really is what it is.
Yeah.
And you're hoping that the shared ideology of the people traffic is going to bolster the business that you've created, that you're trying to then sell to the world. This image that you are, or your brand is, whichever the case may be, right? They say yes. I say, okay. And I said, did you see any of the stuff presented on the main stage? And, oh yeah, I saw this panel for this movie that's coming out, and they had the Avengers, is coming out. They introduced this thing or whatever. And I said, did you present on the main stage? Oh, no, that's only for, certain people or whatever. And it's like, oh, well, I could have bought my way in, but that's like thousands of dollars. Okay. So I said, think of wrestling like this. Imagine if I said, you can go to Comic-Con. You don't have to pay me for the booth. I'll just give you the booth. Mm-hmm. You can have the booth, set up whatever you want, sell whatever you want. Not only that, but I'll also give you 10 minutes on the main stage. You just have to go in order of all the other people that are going before or after you. So you get 10 minutes on the main stage, and you get a booth for free for your stuff. And I'll actually give you $20 to do it, or $50 to do it, or $100 to do it. It's like, oh, that's insane. And that's what wrestling is independently. You're going to a single serving convention, essentially, for one night. You get a space at a table for free, and you get to present your art for 10 minutes in front of the whole room. Undivided attention is on you. Yeah. That should be your recipe for success. Because other people are having to do this, and they're way behind because they have to invest in it. And somebody's actually going to pay you to have these advantages.
Yeah.
Like, the ball is rolling. Like, create something, Yeah. And I think that when people start looking at it that way, then they really understand the X's and O's of what that market is, what the opportunities are, where they are, and who they're speaking to. And it kind of narrows down the goal. Like, okay, I need to be good at the table. I need to present well in the ring, and honestly, what the promoter's paying me to be here should kind of be secondary to what I'm able to generate on my own because I have to do this with other promoters anyway. So, it sort of realigns what the goal should be. And in my opinion, that's how a young performer should look at it in terms of marketability.
Yeah, no, it's a very good analogy that you just gave there because again, like you just well put, you're given a platform, you're given an opportunity. It's live. It's a smaller version of what you see on television, yes, but it's up to you to make it, to own it. It's up to you to show your, absolute best, put your best foot forward and make your best effort. And yeah, like you said, the finances are secondary at that time because you're trying to establish yourself, and someone has graciously given you that platform. I've never heard it expressed like that, so thank you
Well, I
for
think,
sharing that.
yeah, like I think flipping it inside out, like understanding where the finances come, like where the revenue comes from and what the purpose is behind it, right? Because eventually, like, okay, it's so funny. I used to say this all the time. Like when I was younger, I used to not understand what Jesse was teaching me. Like, because he would tell you to do things, but not really tell you why. He would tell you the what, but not the why. And later I would learn other stuff. I would go to like WWE and it'd be kind of like out of Jesse's universe, right? And then I would be like, wow, this is so different than what I was taught. And then later, through experience, when I was like kind of having to put it all together, I would go circle back and I'm like, Jesse gave me the right ingredients in the beginning. He just left it up to me to put it together. And now I understand through experience that his lessons were the right ones all along. He just taught me with freedom. The other thing too that I laughed to myself because it's like, man, it's like, 20 years later, he's still taking me to school. Not passively. He doesn't realize it, but he is. Because when you're young and you're working at these shows and it's like you get so mad when it's like you're making little to no money and you get an envelope with like $10 in it or something like that. And you're like, what is it like?
Yeah.
Like this is a profession to me, and everybody gets hung up over what they're worth, right? The reality is like in the real world, like you're not going to sustain yourself off of money handed to you in an envelope like for a wrestling performance on a given night. Even if you did that 7 nights a week and got exponentially more money in that envelope, that's not a sustainable living. And the simple wisdom is that shouldn't be how your revenue is generated. That is more like a gracious donation to you, or like almost like a tip, like here's a little help to like feed you or put gas in your car or like provide you an opportunity. Because then when you understand that your presentation and your space at the table and the art that you've created, and now you're going to take it to a different promoter and a different promoter and a different promoter, when that starts to grow, now you don't have to work for the people that are just providing the opportunity. Now, when they ask you, you get to tell them this is what it'll take to get me to your show, because now they want you to come to their show because their tickets are going to go up. You're going to make money at the table, and you're also going to make money from your performance in the ring because it means so much to that promoter now.
Yeah.
Which is something it took me decades to like literally learn that, like, that's also why like Bill and Jess would be happy to see birds leave the nest, because it's like you weren't meant to stay there and get
Right.
that envelope for the rest of your life. You were meant to take your allowance, create an entity that's going to leave that nest and do all this.
Mm-hmm.
And then that's when the industry leaders will look around and say, God, look at this guy's a self-sustaining business. This guy's a self-sustaining business. This guy's a self-sustaining business. This is what this guy makes with no budget given to him.
Mm-hmm.
Imagine if we gave him a 6-figure contract and put him behind a camera.
Right. Yeah.
Now that's how it becomes exponential growth.
Yeah.
And I think young wrestlers should look at it that way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree with you. It sounds, again, it's like an audition. When you go to an audition for a film or TV show, they're not paying you to go to the audition. They're not paying your gas or anything. You go
Yeah.
there, the opportunity is merely presented for you to put forth your best and take it as you are auditioning for that casting director. You never know who's going to be there, who's going to share your tape, or who's going to find it on social media. It is up to you to create the character and believe it and own it and put all that you can into it, whether you have $10 to your name or $10,000 to your name. It's up to you to invest in yourself. And it is just merely that platform in order for that to be established. Um, yeah, good answer. Good answer. Good advice, DJ. Um, what shows have you got coming up in the near future? You going back to Japan in the next couple of weeks?
Let's see. Well, I'm home for the summer right now. They got a tournament going on, and I got the time off. I go back in the fall. I think around October. There's a tag team tournament that I'm involved in, and then we got the next year's Wrestle Kingdom, New Year's week in January. So that's the bigger of the bigger stuff coming up. I have a few stuff around the country like coming up. I'm trying to think of all the different cities and different places, but you know, you might find me here and there. But most of it'll just be nice to be home with the kids and stuff like that.
Yeah, it's truly a blessing that you're going to be able to see them grow up. You often hear the stories from the 80s, the guys were never ever home.
Uh,
You're fortunate enough that you have that blessing to be there at least half of the year by what you're saying. So, 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off, at least you're there.
Important milestones for these boys. I've seen them take their first steps and roll over for the first time and say things for the first time. So it's pretty good. It might get a little harder when they have, little league championships and stuff in the future, but hopefully we'll find a way to get it all done. So
Yeah. I mean, yeah, exactly. Well, definitely, God's got his hand on you and, you'll navigate those waters as and when the tides turn. Like you said, maybe it will go into public speaking at some point down the line, whatever, coaching, because you've certainly got all the attributes to be able to do that successfully. TJ, I ask everybody who comes on, in your opinion, what is the meaning of life?
wow. Well, I think about it this way. Whenever I make a mistake, when I was younger, because I'm religious, not just religious and Christian, but like a Catholic, so we're the disciplinarians of the Christian side of the faith tree. So I was always very afraid of the consequences of making a mistake and committing a sin and all that. I feel like as I've gotten older, um, rational reasoning has led me to believe and to probably, hopefully, understand that, um, you know, those things are instilled for a reason as a starting point, and that a true conversation with God someday about discretions, for example, uh, is exactly that. It's going to be a conversation. It's going to be like a gauge of reasoning. Like it's not. I don't think it's a pass or fail sort of thing. It's an understanding. I think life is about understanding. Is really what I'm trying to say. Is I think the meaning of life is understanding because through discretions is how we examine free will, right? So everybody has free will, and I feel like, and it's a little bit morbid to think about it this way, but it's almost like life is one big test of that free will. If we're meant to be in God's image, at least in our faith, and in a lot of different faiths, that's the idea is that we are created in God's image and all that, right? And I again, like I said before, even if you're not a person of faith, your morals have to come from somewhere. So you're modeled after something, whether you believe it or not. I just think that that's sort of a universal framework. That being the case, free will is a test, and at the end of it, it's sort of a gauge of you know what who did you become, why did you become that, why did you make the choices that you made, and when you made mistakes, what level of that was a mistake in your mind or a mistake in your execution or an accident? Like there's so many things that will go into that conversation when the reality of the whole thing is meant to get an understanding of you to God and understanding of God to you. He wants to understand you and what he's given you and what you did with it. And when you finally, are at the end of this ride, long or short, like you're meant to understand the purpose of that. And I think that to me, that's the rational way of examining faith of any kind, is that life is about understanding.
Yeah, very.
Think about it on a long enough timeline, understanding is really the only thing that you gain and never lose. You could lose money, you could lose loved ones, you could lose health, you could gain and lose anything.
Yeah.
The one thing you never gain and lose, you only gain it, is understanding,
Mhm.
wisdom. That's you gain it and you add to it. It's nothing else works that way. And so that to me says simple wisdom would suggest that that means that that's the most important thing, because that's the only thing you can gather and not lose.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think life is about understanding.
Yeah, amen. That's a very, very good answer, and you were saying there about God understanding you, you understanding God in preparation for what's to come after. As our faith dictates, there will be something after this, and for, like you said before, you said it so well, even those who don't believe, there are some basic blueprints in every human being that will dictate to them that something is there,
Had to come somewhere, I the and I don't mean to say this as like looking down on something, because it's not that I'm looking down on it, but I find it funny in a peaceful way. Like whenever there's criticism of faith that's based on a moral foundation, because it's like your judgment is based on morals that had to come from somewhere. And if you don't believe in God, which is fine, and we could all be wrong. Maybe we're wrong. Maybe there's no God, but that those morals had to come from somewhere.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, like when you reach the end of this, if there's nothing on the other side in that moment, it's still going to be about understanding, because you're going to look back on your life and in your last moment and say, well, how did I do? So, like one way or the other, it's still going to be about understanding. So I try to keep that in mind as the rational um, finish line,
Mhm.
because I don't know what follows this, and maybe I'm wrong, maybe nothing follows this, but at a certain point, that's what life is going to be all about, is understanding. Did I really understand myself and the world around me for my ride? And if there is something behind this, I would love to have an answer for that when that conversation happens. So
Yeah. Well, I definitely think, like I said, in my belief that there will be, I will say, and, when we see these miracles occur in our lives, when we see even a dream, I mean, a dream, a thought in your mind, the fact that we as humans can go into our mind, taste a taste, even though we're not actually tasting it. I mean, that is, that wasn't by chance. That did not develop by chance. It is by, intellectual design. It is divine design. So, but anyway, that's my 2 cents. It's not about me today. It's about TJ. So, but TJ, stay on the line with me if you will. I'm just gonna say a goodbye to the viewers today. I think we've got it into a great place. So, ladies and gentlemen, this has been a truly inspiring and educating piece today with a talented professional wrestler, TJ Perkins. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here today. And everybody be sure to check out what TJ's doing. Follow him on social media. He's going to Japan at the end of the year, like we've heard. He'll be in and around the country, so be sure to keep up with him. Until next time, everybody, victor what you must victor in your life. I am Emir. This has been TJ Perkins, and this has been Victoire.